proposal 70.
Kind of,
I'm having a silly.
we're gonna have to relate. I'm calling the meeting to order, the work session. So, I'm not sure why, but somebody will make a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those say no. The ayes have it. All right. I guess we'll do public comment later, like it says. So, I think we left off, we were working through this list of amendments. And one of the things that we did, or talked about, was the wireless proposal. And so I think at one point, somewhere along the way, and I'm working off, I think this August 31st draft edition to the May amendments. Does everybody have that? Got August 31st down at the bottom.
I'm looking at the one that Michelle emailed today. It doesn't have a date yet.
Well, okay, so what, I just want to get everybody right caught up. So what Michelle has done, and thank you, Michelle, has basically updated the chart and given us an index of all these changes as basically where we are. So, one of the things I want to mention, I don't know if we're going to get to this tonight, is that Gary Light sent me, before our last meeting, we really didn't get on to that, some definitions, some new definitions that really are on the first page of this thing that Michelle circulated. This is it, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. For transient lodging, tourist home, bed and breakfast, and hotel definitions. And those are on the first, well, some of them are on the first page, one of them is on the second page. The thing that I noticed in going through this was that at the time this was done, years ago, the General Assembly was considering a state law provision that was going to exempt owner-occupied bed and breakfast type things from local regulation, and was going to do one of these things that they do from time to time, I think to make Phil Owen mad, really, because it always makes Phil mad, of taking away our local jurisdiction and just saying, like they've done with wineries now, and they've done it with this agritourism, although what agritourism is a pretty, if you read the definition, it's a pretty broad thing. But anyway, so that's why there was a distinction. And at this point, the windup was that after it passed both houses of the General Assembly and went to the governor for reasons that never were clear to me, they changed their minds kind of, and they decided to let it lay over. The governor never signed it, and to let it lay over till the following session of the General Assembly, which I believe must have been 2016 or 17, whichever. And what happened was it never came up again, or if it did, I don't know, it never got out of committee, and so it never got passed. So I think we ought to get rid of it. Because we've got two now. I've got other than owner-occupied and owner-occupied. The only reason we were breaking it out was because of what the state was proposing to do. And since they never did it, I think we ought to just stick with having one definition.
they're not fully formed, but thank you for, you mentioned the work that I sent you. That was both something that I had drafted and we discussed at an early meeting, and I think I also sent you something that Holly Mead has done based on wherever Fauquier was at that time. I do think I like not having more distinctions than we need. I would say, though, that when we have looked at some of these applications, we have made a difference. It has made a difference to us, it seems, that when there's someone living there and a guest is staying in someone's home and the owner is there and it's it's still primarily a residence versus when it is not. And so I think we could deal with that in the context of additional standards or something like that. But I do think that we have made that distinction. The concern I had with the way we were going is I don't know why we were differentiating whether someone owns it or whether there's a resident manager or something. It seemed to me we were going down a definitional rabbit hole, kind of like the family business.
Well, the reason was because that's what the state
was planning.
was planning to do.
So,
As a matter of fact, as I recollect, that definition is copied right out of the legislation. So.
well, I guess to summarize my thought in support of what you're saying, I agree that we shouldn't do that, but I still think we might want to be mindful of the fact that whether there's a resident manager or some sort has made a difference in some of the discussions we've had on these things. I don't know if others think that was unnecessary, but I know when, for example, someone said, well, all I want to do is have this one room in my house where if my kids aren't here, they can come and stay. I think there was a general feeling that that was less of a thing than if it was fully commercial.
Right. Well, personally, I don't disagree, but we don't have any special standard for that. I mean,
But we can do it in our own standard setting. I mean, I suppose. I mean, if it's a general condition that we want to apply, we don't.
well, then maybe we'll get to that when we get to that. 'Cause we're getting to some, so maybe we'll see if we don't have a condition about that. But, so is everybody pretty much in agreement that this, the definition is going to be the one that's on page 1?
Are there any bread and breakfasts now in the county that are run and are not owner-occupied that have resident managers?
Well, you raise a good question. I think under the current definitional structure, funky as it is, there are not, but that's because we have a different definition of tourist home than bed and breakfast. If you start combining those and having it all be one thing, then I think we have lots of them that are not.
Well, no, we're going to have a separate.
We are still going to have, I thought you were proposing to.
Oh no, just the distinction between, at least for now. Oh, look, it's on both sides.
Well, the definition that's currently listed in the second column would apply to both tourist home and a bed and breakfast. So unless you're making some kind of other distinction, there would no longer be a practical distinction between a tourist home and a bed and breakfast the way this is currently defined. And that's what, again, some of the stuff I gave you, admittedly, it got probably too complicated too quickly.
No, we see, there was a new definition. It's on the 3rd page of tourist home. And it says right there, Gary liked to write up recommendations, and here they are. At least as I've got
What
it.
do we do? A tourist home is distinct from a bed and breakfast, and that the term of accommodation, I guess, is generally longer than 1 week. Yeah, this distinction was not, the reason that came up is we said, first of all, to define something as what it generally means is. For those of you
I thought we took that out.
I'm sorry?
We took that out. With the column, the proposed language is the third,
Oh,
I guess the 4th column where it's in bold. And we got rid of that. And P.S. while I was on the BZA, I either abstained or voted no on just about every single tourist home because supposed tourist home because none of them met that, they were all for weekends. So it really worked too, it was supposed to be an incentive to the planning commission to change the definition.
Well, then I'm afraid I'm back to where I was before, where I
So
don't
you're-
see what the difference
Right,
is.
so your definition, you had one for transient lodging, which I don't know if everybody's got this probably.
I have
Emailed to you, can you put that up on the screen maybe? No? Because we're not doing that?
This only displays what I put on Boarddocs.
Oh, I see. All right, well, they're not long, so I'll just read it. The proposed, and I assume this is what Gary wrote, not Colin. There was one for transient lodging. And it says, use of any building or portion thereof for sleeping accommodations for a period of fewer than 30 consecutive days to persons who are not members of the immediate family while operating the establishment in rooms classified as lodging units under Virginia Administrative Code 12 VAC 5-431-10, and for a charge, and for which a charge is paid for such accommodations. For purposes of this zoning ordinance, all transient lodging establishments are 1. Classified either as tourist homes, bed and breakfast, or hotels, regardless of how they may be marketed. And 2. Subject to the limitation of section 170-28 on the number of dwellings per lot. Then, tourist home. So that would be like a totally new thing to insert. The tourist home definition is as follows. A transient lodging facility that accommodates not more than 10 persons in not more than 5 rooms / lodging units, and 1 is rented in its entirety, not by lodging unit, to a single party of guests. 2 does not have a resident manager. 3 serves no meals, and 4 does not accommodate events for more than twice the number of resident guests. What was the basis for that? The last one.
No, because I think the issue that we've had with these things is, it used to be, back in the day, just having a bed and breakfast allowed you some latitude to have people who weren't staying there come for events. Like, I don't know, others of you have probably been to events like board meetings at the Congress House, for example. I had 2 or 3 events there. And so in the historical definition of B&B, there was this sort of, you could do a little bit of gathering there beyond just staying around. So that's why and I think when we did this, we were trying to keep the total number of occupants lower. So what I've tried to do is create a tourist home is just like a residence. You can't be having parties, you can't be having events, you're gonna have a family come and stay there, and this one is the lighter touch, the less intensive use, differentiated from the next one, which is bed and breakfast. So that's the overall logic in what I wrote.
Anybody have any questions or thoughts about that?
May I have a thought on that? I know that
Are you on the commission?
no. Nationally, they're stopping people from having, they're putting in contracts not to have parties at these tourist homes, temporary housing things, because people are renting for the weekend and then throwing big parties. So you're in the right direction for a lot more reasons than just local.
So I think it only makes sense if you also read the next one.
Okay, so
kind of get together.
Bed and breakfast, the transient lodging facility that accommodates not more than 10 persons in not more than 5 rooms lodging units, and 1 may be rented by individual lodging unit to different parties of guests. 2 may have a resident manager, whereas the other one doesn't. 3 may serve meals to overnight guests. And 4 may accommodate occasional events up to 4 per year for more than 2 times the number of resident guests.
So that was kind of trying to get to what the Conyers House kind of did. It was the sort of traditional bed and breakfast. So Anyway, I know it's complicated, there's probably more parameters there that people are comfortable with, but that was the logic at the time.
If you're gonna rent these, basically they're rentals. And the differential between a tourist and a bed and breakfast, somebody goes there and stays for 1 night, 2 nights, and they eat food there. I mean, there's not much difference between they're using it as a tourist home and actual bed and breakfast. So it's basically, say either it's night or the sky is dark. It's kind of saying the same thing. And I'm just wondering, just for simplicity, are we gonna end up treating each class differently in terms of permitting them? And if they're gonna go through the same process, why don't you just have one category for everything?
That's what the Code of Virginia has, I just showed it to them. Hotel, the definition of hotel is any lodging.
Well, actually, that's the regs, not the code, but,
That's the definition of it.
right, the definitions in that code section of 12 VAC 5-43110. Hotel means any establishment offering to the public for compensation, transitory lodging or sleeping accommodations overnight or otherwise. What would or otherwise be for sleep?
I'm a big party.
Okay.
Hot sheet.
Okay, well, I'm sure down in somebody knew what they meant to put that in there. Anyway, including but not limited to facilities known by varying nomenclatures or designations as hotels, motels, travel lodges, tourist homes, or hostels and similar facilities by whatever name called that consists of 2 or more lodging units. So under the reg that we're citing,
That's the definition.
all these things are hotels. Well, that's all. And then they've got a separate one for bed and breakfast facility means a residential type establishment that provides 2 or more rental accommodations and food service on any single day to a maximum of 18 transient guests for a period of 5 or more days. Wow, in any calendar year. Oh, I see. Or any residential type of facility providing at least 1 rental accommodation for transient guests and food service for a total of 30 or more days in any calendar year. Well, that's
So I would just like to comment on Mr. Henry's point, if I would. I agree with his sentiment. I guess what I would add is I did see a likelihood that we would put somewhat tighter restrictions on the location of a bed and breakfast defined in this way versus a tourist home. And to me, the place that I would differentiate personally is on the road access. I feel that we've gotten into these issues with tourist homes on private roads, and I could see allowing the lighter touch tourist home that doesn't have any of this other stuff on a private road, but I would be in favor of preventing bed and breakfasts from being on tourist homes, or on these roads. So I agree with him in principle, but I liked it this way because I did see a difference in how we would regulate it.
okay. Anything else?
So that line, you're reading from that, that's not what I was really getting
No,
at.
that's not
So,
what
so let me ask Michelle a question. Michelle,
Yes, sir.
when you get people that come in and talk to you about this transient housing, want to do something, is it confusing to you which category they fit under? Is it acceptable? Next question, is it acceptable to have these different definitions? Or would it be easier for you to explain and educate the people that it's only one way to do it? If you have one definition of all, one size fits all. Do you have problems going through all 3?
It doesn't matter to me.
But can I follow up a question?
Sure.
If the state has a definition and the counties is different, which one are you obligated to follow?
They have different purposes.
According to this, it's the same purpose, it's lodging for 1 night or more.
No, we have zoning. Zoning is a local purpose, and, we're not inconsistent with it. We're just defining, we are differentiating between those things that the state defines as different categories of hotel. There's nothing that prevents us from doing that. If from a zoning perspective, we feels that they need to be treated differently.
You have case law to substantiate that?
No, but I have an opinion about it, that's all I'm
I
sharing.
don't know, I think he's right, because what's the title of that whole section? Isn't that a health department stuff?
Yeah.
Right, and that's all down that path, because whenever the planning commission looked at something back in those days, and the BZA granted a special permit, that would have to be reviewed by the building department, and he had to look at it, and the health department had to look at it, and that's why we had all these different, we had different categories for number of rooms, but whenever it went to the building and health department, they looked at it from this perspective. So we were trying to get them all streamlined so that there wasn't 3 or 4 different
I
categories.
understand, but
But now you're asking for 3 or 4 different definitions within the same category. It's the same thing that we did back in those days. That was the whole purpose that we labored over this thing. We had went through all those arguments, and now you're wanting to change it again.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Frazier.
Frazier, I just don't agree with you. I don't think that's why we did this. We did this because our old definitions were no longer consistent with the market and the world we were dealing with. There's all kinds of cases.
The market has nothing to do with
I'm sorry, sir, I
regulation.
have the floor. There's all kinds of places where the state, for one purpose, whatever they're doing, defines things slightly different. There's nothing wrong with our putting a finer point on these definitions, and when the health department is applying their rules on state code, they use the state definitions. So, I hear what you're saying, I don't agree at all.
All right, first off, how come when I'm talking, you can talk over me or start talking before I get finished? And second, why do we feel that we have the need or the urgency to disregard what the state regs are and start down this path again when we were 3-4 years ago?
I've already explained my answer.
But I asked you if you had case law to substantiate what your argument is, you say you have none.
Ron, that's a nonsensical question, I'm sorry.
It's not a nonsensical question, because zoning is a big thing and people sue each other over it. And we have a situation over here.
Okay, do you have case law that says the county definitions need to be exactly the same as the state?
Well, we're talking about the same things.
Okay, well, I'm just asking you the same question you just asked me.
No, we're talking about the very same things, and I think that if zoning is going to mean anything, then we have to use accepted definitions, and you want to come up with definitions according to Gary.
We've had different definitions in our statute from the beginning of time.
No, we have not.
Well, what do you mean, that what we've got now isn't anywhere close to what's in the state's code?
That's because we're so out of sync with the state code.
Well, a lot of other people, like most of these other counties are too. I don't know, I tend to agree with Gary, to tell you the truth. I don't see why we can't have a finer point, because what we're doing is we're not saying that it's not in that category that the state has given it. We're saying if it's this kind of a hotel, if you will, or if it's this level of intensity of a bed and breakfast, because, look at what you have it, I don't, your code there, the hotel said it starts with 2, anything that's more than 2, right?
Right.
Okay, well, what we're doing is we're saying up to 10 rooms, is going to be one category, and it's going to be allowed by special use or special exception permit in a certain district. But if you have more than 10, then that's a new level that A, has to maybe get a higher level of a permit, and B, it may not be allowed in all the different zones. Like, you may not allow a hotel with more than 5 rooms and 10 guests in an agriculture zone. And frankly, under the comp plan that says, commercial type of activities are supposed to be in or near the villages, that might make sense. So I don't see a problem with doing that.
How does your argument, how does it mesh with the building code where you have to get permits issued on use groups?
Well,
We don't know, see, that's what we were trying to do
Well,
4 years ago.
that's what I asked you again, is that the health department?
This is health code, this is health
Yeah, so
department.
they've got one, and then I don't know what
The building
they've got
code
some.
is something different. The building code also
Right.
looks at the use group that it falls under.
Right, and that I know the break point was 10, because Richie came in here and talked to us about this
When they get
statewide
correct.
building
And
code.
that's why we did, I think, adjust
And
the.
so, well, so with that also sort of undercuts your argument that obviously the building people don't feel that they're bound by the health department.
But there's-
They got their own reg too.
There's at least two different building codes. You're going to get the.
Right.
Well-
Okay.
And a person can come in and say that they're going to do this under this building code, and then that use group would apply.
For the purposes of applying building codes. This is just not that complicated.
As long as the building code, because if we talk, wait a minute, let me get my thought out if I can. If we issue, if the BZA or whoever has a special permit process issues the special permit for a tourist home or bed and breakfast, then it goes to the building code and the health department looks at how that particular use meshes with their regulations, and I think that they have a foot to stand on when, or a leg to stand on, whatever, when they go into court, like this mess up here on the hill, and they can say clearly they met the state definition, and they were given a permit by the county, and now the county's saying X, Y, and Z, and they want to do W. And that was the whole purpose of trying to have this mesh together, so that when the zoning administrator got it, she didn't have to look, or whoever had the job at the time, has to look at it and say, well, wait a minute, the BZA granted it under this, but actually it's under this, under the state code, and then the building office says, well, it's under this, and the health department says it's under this, and you've got a mess on your hands. And that's what we were trying to avoid. And now, for whatever reason, 4 years later, people have short memories, and they don't remember the arguments that we had at this very table over the very same subject. Make it comply with the state code, and we don't have to worry about 4 different
Well,
codes.
then, so what do you want to, because I don't think, I'm not sure that what's written here.
It may not be, because if you're
Complies with
correct,
that.
if you're correct that we were doing that because of a potential change in state code, then maybe we.
Well, no, that was only the part about bed and breakfast and owner occupied and non-owner occupied.
I don't think we need to have a different definition for any of them. We use the state definition. And then the zoning administrator can use the state definition, and then the building inspector can use, or a building official can use the state definition, and the health department is going to use the state definition.
Well, that's gonna be awfully limiting, because if we can't do anything beyond use the hotel definition, that's gonna be extremely limiting in our ability to differentiate. If everything is,
That's what I kept trying to tell y'all. Y'all were wanting to hand out these tourist home permits willy-nilly to anybody that said they wanted a tourist home or a B&B, and it actually, under at least the health department code and the building code, it was a small hotel. And we had a ticking time bomb on our hands, because everybody wants to get into this, it's basically just a real estate scheme where people have a tourist home and it becomes a tax write-off. They're not even renting these things out to make any money at it.
I'm sorry, Mr. Frazier, I just can't agree with this.
You don't have to agree with me. Go talk to the Commissioner of Revenue and see how much of them actually produce an income. I'm not up here talking, about stuff that I haven't researched at least a little bit.
All right, well,
It seems to make sense if you have one definition for anything that's rented. Other than, there's a long-term rental, and then everything else
It's short-term.
is short-term.
And we're not gonna differentiate between an Omni showroom and a bed and breakfast?
On what?
A big hotel? Of course we are.
Well, I think,
There you go with your zoning purposes.
Well, this is what we're doing.
We're talking, now, then you have to talk about, does it fit the neighborhood? Does it have the proper zoning? Does it have enough footprint to house something of a certain size? We're not talking about anything else there.
well, now that we've got a new definition, or you propose to have a new definition, what zones, when you get over to the chart, what zones is it going to be allowed in? And what are the special standards going to be? I mean, it seems to me that even if you just use one definition, you're going to have to write up a whole list of special standards that apply.
You've actually already got them, you've got so many bedrooms or whatever per acre. You've got density even on tourist homes and B&Bs, we just never actually applied them.
Well, all right, now just a minute. You kind of interrupted my train of thought now. How are you going to write that in? I mean, what if it's a situation that Gary has kind of captured, in his definition of tourist home, where they're basically renting out the entire place, not by, in other words, there's not gonna be some people, you know, the Smiths in unit 1 and somebody else in unit 2 and so forth and so on, up to 10 persons. You're just saying that should be allowed across the board?
You have to look at the acreage, you have to look at the density. I think that's how you would differentiate it, unless it's rezoned to commercial
All right,
use.
well, what if it's on 25 acres?
Definition of density is housing units, not lodging units. They're not the same unit. I'm sorry, we're talking apples and oranges again.
No, go back and look at your code.
All right, well,
I believe it's
I'm still
already
asking
there.
the question, how do you propose to differentiate between the more intensive use, like really a hotel? Because the hotel definition is so broad that it includes tourist homes and bed and breakfasts. What's the right way to say that, Rick? Where does the S go?
Bed and breakfasts, I believe.
I think beds,
Hard as it is to say.
beds and one.
Is that the or otherwise? Is that what that meant? All right. Well,
I would just point out that this is part of the reason that, despite conversing on this many times in the past, we haven't come to closure on it, because the conversations have generally gone something like this.
So, of all the different categories of potential housing that we have, that's not, that's limited properties, whether it be a bed and breakfast or tourist home. And we have another definition, do we not, for country inns?
Right, that's what, you've got country inns, you've got conference centers.
Okay, just to be clear, the notion of those definitions and the reason, and this is really the reason why transient lodging is defined, everything is either a tourist home, a bed and breakfast, or a hotel, and there we would, by implication, get rid of all those other overnight accommodation definitions. This was designed to be comprehensive. You got 3 categories, and everything fits into one of them.
So we were running into a problem before, we had these country inns and resorts as well.
yeah, that's what, but wait a minute, is country inn and resort, is that one or is that 2 different things?
Well,
Country Inn, retreat, and lodge.
Yeah, country inn, retreat, or lodge, and then you've got,
And what's the definition of that? That's up to like 40 or something,
it's
right?
less than 5 acres, and you've got greater than 5 acres. So then you've got conference center and resort under that. These are all under recreation and amusement uses. And then you would have to go to the special, what I'm looking for there, took off around the corner. You have to look at the additional standards for each one of those. And then that's where you would differentiate what type of facility it is for zoning purposes because of the amount of occupancy you have. How many rooms you have, or how many bedrooms that can be used per acre, et cetera.
okay, just a point of clarity, we're only talking about the overnight uses. If you start talking about conferences and events, you're into a whole nother area because there's big event facilities that we've seen that are not overnight. So we're not taking that on here. We're only taking over on the overnight accommodation part, the transient lodging part. Events and conference centers, I agree, we've got too many categories of them, but we're not dealing with that here. We're just dealing with the overnight stuff.
Well, I don't think the definition would change. It's the gross number of bedrooms or occupancy that you use per lot.
What if you had 500 people in one big room, Ron?
You're not gonna let them sleep there, are you?
Right, that's what we're talking about, though. You still want to have parking. It's like
But those are additional standards for that type of facility, for that type of use. If you have to worry about parking, then that falls under our parking regulations. That has nothing to do with transient occupancy. Now you're mixing apples and oranges.
Okay, I give up.
Well, okay, see, he gave up, so let's move on then. We've already argued it enough.
Well, I don't want
We're
to
gonna
argue about it and then move on.
We're gonna
I want
use-
to get something, what I would get some consensus here
Use
on
the
what we're gonna
state's,
do.
use the state's definition.
But that's not what was in here, that was agreed on 3 or 4 years ago.
Well, it's very simple, let's just agree on it now.
I will never agree to that. I'm sorry. That's silly.
All right, so, does anybody want to discuss this anymore? Let's see where everybody's head is at on this. I mean, wait, Ron, do you want to say anything, Mary Catherine, or Ron?
And I just say that I hear Ron's point that for simplicity, it's nice to have, one definition if you can, but I assume what would happen is if you have a zoning definition for one thing and then you go into the health department, then they don't look at the zoning definition, they look at the state definition on the health code or the county definition, and then they apply that. So I don't know that they have to do the same thing, but again, I haven't looked closely at that.
But, Mr. Chairman, if I could add to it with this issue,
Well, wait a minute, I'm not giving you a chance to answer every single person.
No,
Let me go around the
let me
table,
just-
Ron.
let me just
Wait a
say
minute,
this.
Let me go around the table.
let me add, I should have said this somewhere along the way before I got here. Some time back, the county attorney was talking to the board of supervisors about, I think it was the adaptive reuse. And we used, for adaptive reuse, we used from 1962. And the reason that we do that is because, why?
Because that was the first
First subdivision ordinance. So then when you start talking about zoning, you use 1966, that was the first zoning ordinance. All right, so the county attorney says, we can make that date, any date you really want, it's arbitrary, because we just picked that date, but we picked that date tied to something. He said, and whoever goes and argues this point in court has got to have a reason for why they came up with that. So we're gonna pick all these different definitions because we have an arbitrary reason for doing it.
No, I don't agree with that, Ron. We don't have an because the reason that the main thing that's changing in this,
So what are you gonna tie it to?
it's tied to the building code.
What?
The 10 thing, it used to be 12. 12 persons, that's what was in conflict. It used to say, look at page, I don't know, these aren't numbered, but I think I'm on page, must be the third page. Okay? Definition tourist home. Any building, blah, 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 for not more than 12 persons. So the main thing that got changed was 10 got reduced to 10, or 12 got reduced to 10. And the reason for that is the building code, not that health code, because Richie said that once you go over 10 rooms, the building code classifies it as a hotel, and it has to be sprinkled, and it has to have all that stuff. So people were applying for that.
Right.
They were getting a permit for up to 12 people. And then when they went over to Richie's to try to get an occupancy permit for what they had a zoning permit for, Richie was telling them, well, since your permit is up to 12 people, you got to sprinkle this building.
Right.
And do all, I don't think that was the only thing, and maybe there was stuff about emergency exits, I think. You had to have signs like that with lights and a fire escape and all kinds of stuff like that once you go over 10 people. So that was how it got to where it is.
And they wouldn't opt for that. And they would
Who wouldn't opt for what?
Whoever got the permit. So
But they already had the permit,
Right,
they didn't
but
find out
They had a
until
zoning
later.
permit, but they would opt to do fewer rooms, maybe.
But no, but what was happening was Richie was saying, but you have the zoning permit for 12 people, so I'm making you apply, or I'm gonna apply the standards for 12 people, and that is sprinkled and fire escapes and all that kind of thing.
So we fixed that.
So we fixed, that's the fix we made, but it wasn't that thing about the health code, we never used that definition. We used, because I remember I got Richie to come to the meeting and explain that. So the only thing about 12 VAC 543110, which is what you're reading, is that it's got a definition of lodging units. And that part we did use, because that talks about, well, I don't know, you have it there so you can read what it says. But it's any, the rooms, so we sort of have a mix in here. we have the 10 occupants came from the building code, and the number of rooms and the definition of lodging units came from the health department regs. Because, yeah, those people have to go also get a health department permit, because they're subject to their jurisdiction for, I don't know, like stuff like towels and I don't know, stuff like that.
I think once they start renting a room, they're automatically subject to it. And they're subject to these.
Well, they are, but they're not, well, okay, but that doesn't matter for zoning purposes, we make a distinction, I agree with what Gary
I
said.
think the distinction.
Well, wait a minute.
Units.
What, we can make any distinction we want. That's their code, I mean, just like the health department's not bound by the building department's definition and vice versa, and neither are we. We can make, as long as it's reasonable, we can make up any definition we want. And the point of our definition ought to be what's allowed for zoning purposes, because once you go over 10 occupants, 5 rooms, 10 occupants, you're not talking about somebody renting out a few rooms in their house. You're talking about kind of a major commercial operation that could change the character of the neighborhood, could have a lot of, it could create traffic, it could create groundwater and sewage problems and all that stuff.
But so already spelled out with your country inn or greater than 5, less than 5 things.
Well, actually, no, it's not, because they're all completely out of sync.
I thought we were always very short on our resorts and country inn. I don't think we've really had a very good definitions on all that or handle on that.
Well, I'll make a comment about that. I believe Country Inn was defined the way it was in part because the Conyers house, even at that time, was bigger than the 10.
I don't think that's right, because the Conyers house was the first or second bed and breakfast in the county.
I know, but I'm saying it had more, I think it actually was classified as a
It had 5 rooms, huh?
We had 6, I can't remember.
it had more than,
Well, what did it use?
in any event, there wasn't, maybe I'm wrong about the Conyers house, but there was, the whole lodge thing, as I understood it, was trying to differentiate something that existed at that time. I tend to agree, look, you can argue about the 3 that I've used, but I want to make it clear that I'm proposing these 3 and to get rid of all the others.
Right, so the hotel is going to be, have its own special standards, and it's going to be anything more than 10 persons or more than 5 rooms. So, what, do we have a consensus to use these definitions, or don't we?
Well, I have to say, I think it's a little bit of a disadvantage since the others haven't really seen them, and we're just talking about.
All right, well, let's everybody, now we have this lovely discussion, everybody can think about it. I hope you.
Well, I don't think they have them yet.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Okay,
They're not on Boarddocs. I sent them to you, David, I did not send them.
right, and when I got this, I apologize, I've just been busy, and so I didn't get to circulate it, because I didn't get to compare really with what was here. So, all right, well, let's pass that over, and we'll revisit this. Hopefully, we'll have a little work session at our next regular meeting later in October, unless you want to have another one before then. Let's go over to, but I do want to sort of give everyone some homework. Will you please look at these things? There's quite a few things about additional standards and all that, and they all apply to the tourist homes, bed and breakfast, and so forth. So please check them out. So we'll be ready to discuss it. And I will circulate these definitions to everybody probably at the end of tonight's, after I go home from this meeting. All right, the wireless, which is where we got up to, page 3 of the discussion draft. Of August 31 at the bottom. Is that the latest one everybody's working on?
Are we done with like May amendments now?
No, these are still May.
I'd like to concentrate on those, but unless we're adding that in, correct?
Right,
Yeah.
because the other ones, I don't know, I thought we had gone through all of them except the bed and breakfast ones.
Okay, well, that's what I'm saying. Are we done with everything else?
I think so.
I thought thought you were gonna get real language back on the streets thing. Did you get it?
I just want to get all those complete, I want to have all that out of the way, because, you know, the wireless and all is still subject to the board, even.
Right, well, this is what we're gonna put out for a public hearing, hopefully in November.
If we,
I just want to do all this.
I don't know that, let's see, the application. I don't know that we did talk about all these other ones, did we? The,
I guess that's the private streets.
Private streets, I was supposed to, I mean, I did actually, I have a case that's about a private street.
Oh, boy.
And I don't, that's not here in the county, but anyways, I had occasion to review all the cases and about what's a private road and what's a public road. And to be honest with you, it's a very difficult subject in that believe it or not, the case law that goes all the way back to the 1800s talks about, well, in urban areas, a public thoroughfare or something like a public street has to be dedicated by the owner, like if it's a subdivision, and accepted by before the Bird Act, by the county. They have to accept it, and if it hasn't been accepted, then it's not a public street. And one of the issues is whether you can have a public street by prescription, which means if people have been using it for more than 20 years, does it become a public street? The answer is no, because one of the requirements is the use has to be exclusive. And so if the public's using it, it can't be exclusive, so there's no, it's kind of like squatter's rights. Anyway, in rural areas, there doesn't necessarily have to be this dedication and acceptance. So it's very murky here in Rappahannock, or in other similar situations. So I don't know, I really think that the definition that's in there is okay. I did reread it today, and over the past week or so, with all this in mind, that what we had talked about, that you wanted me to put in some kind of a more specific definition. And I can't really come up with a better one than what I wrote when I wrote this. And that's the reason I'm trying to find where it is in this great big chart.
My concern was that you have the, like, you know, my property.
Street road, sorry, I got
It's
it.
like a carriage road, and
at the bottom,
it's,
it's
you know, a dip and run through the forest, you know? I mean, is that some sort of a road that has to be dealt with setbacks?
Where is this, wait a minute. For the purpose of, for purposes of oh, here, purpose of the setback requirement, right. So, I mean, that's what I wrote. A public road that was never part of the state secondary maintenance system, which is 1932 and after, or roads that once were a part of the state secondary system, but discontinued from state maintenance. And the reason that's all that, that I did with it, I didn't really get into anything else because we know what they are. We know the ones that were part of the state system and have been discontinued because the state's got all that record. The problem is a public road that was never part of the state system, or the first part.
Right.
And
Right. I'm not sure you
I
have that.
mean, what, you know, if it's a public road that was never part of the state secondary system, your problem with that, I thought we kind of resolved that.
Well, I think the issue, if I could, is that the concern is we're requiring setbacks from this sort of ill-defined set of roads that pretty clearly is not going to be visually obvious because of they're not being used, right? I mean, that's, and so,
How about if we put that is still in use?
well, that would help.
All right, because
But
I think your concern was like, I don't want to pick on people, but, the one that always comes to my mind is Bob Lander up on Reddit. Because Bob Lander built his house right on the old public road that it didn't used to stop at the top of Reddit. It used to come all the way down and come right and connect up with what is basically Thunder Valley Lane, right where my coach was by my house.
Cut down in the Manwaring place too. And it forked off on the other side of the road.
Well, on the top of it, but on the north side, it comes all, anyways, that was a public road. And it was never taken into the state system, only the part from the top down to Woodville was. So, it's still, most of it, I'd say 80–90% of it is still very obvious. There's a road bed, and, it's kind of a hiking trail now. It's still a public road.
But my question was, where are we defining what a public road is? Because what does that mean? Does it mean a road that a lot of people use? Does it mean a road that was,
Well, you have to go to the,
that was accepted by the county, as you say?
well, no, you have to go to the, to the definition. There is a definition of what is a public road, and that's part of the issue in the ordinance.
I thought we had a definition of street, but not public road, but I could be mistaken.
You're mistaken.
I could.
Private street, C, street, private. Public street, C, street, public.
Well, it seems to me that
Road, C, street.
What is a public?
We're getting close. Wait a minute.
Private, see public.
Wait a minute, I'm getting there. Street, okay, here's the streets we got. Street, a strip of land intended for vehicular, I hesitate to read these because I have a feeling Gary Light is going to say, I don't like that either. I don't like any of these definitions.
I'm trying to back off.
Anyway, no, and you're probably right. Street, a strip of land intended for vehicular or pedestrian traffic and providing the principal means of access to property, including but not limited to road, lane, drive, avenue, highway, boulevard, or any other thoroughfare. Okay.
We've got public street.
They left the alley out.
But you have public.
All right, then they got a bunch of other stuff. Street, interstate, a street so designated in the comp plan. Well, we don't have any interstate streets. Street line, street local collector, street major collector, street major thoroughfare. I can tell you right now, we copied this from far here because we don't think we have any of that in our comp plan, but they do. Okay, street primary highway, we know what that is. Street private, and that's the part we're changing, I think. A street dedicated by deed of easement and/or designated on a recorded survey when same is not maintained by the Virginia Department of Transportation and is not now a component of the state primary or secondary system.
So what is a public road?
Street public.
Public street there.
Street public. A platted street dedicated for the use of the public and graded and paved in order that every person has the right to pass and to use it at all times for all purposes of travel, transportation, or parking to which it is adapted and devoted or currently or formerly maintained by the Commonwealth of Virginia. And that was amended in 2008.
But that's a public street. What's a public road?
Street, it says road, public said C street.
I'm sorry, Dave, does that mean that in order to be a street or a road, it has to be paved?
Unplatted?
That's what
I
it
think that's what
says.
it said.
That's what it says.
well, let's
Graded and paved, it really should be graded or paved, but
That's a public street.
that's a public street, but it's also a road, public.
so let's
Road says C street.
let's back up a second here.
All right.
Okay, so the purpose of the zoning with setbacks is to provide some planning for access, future development, and community development, neighborhood development, all these things. So someplace it's been determined that you need a reasonable distance from the access so that houses do not set right on the road. If the roads are improved or widened, it doesn't create a situation where there has to be a condemnation or something like that. the road becomes public. So, it's all part of the planning process. So whether it's a public road that hasn't been maintained, or whether it's a public road that hasn't been abandoned, I think it's reasonable to apply setbacks here, because most of these private roads that we'll be talking about are not 100 feet long, some of them are miles long.
Right.
So it's reasonable to assume that over 50 years, there'll be activity along these roads and things will happen. So it's reasonable to assume that you need to have setbacks.
Right.
That, why should they be that much different than if they had state roads? And if they're these public roads that have never been maintained by the state or abandoned, I guess the width of those things can run anything from 12 feet, 20 feet, probably not 30 feet. So, I mean, it's...
But the problem, Al, I mean, and everybody, is,
Well,
is look at the section on
You gotta let
setbacks.
me finish, Dave.
All right, sorry.
So you've got to go back to the point of planning, and that's what we should be starting with.
I agree with you entirely. And that's where this came from, because if you look at section 170-37, which is what's the cross-reference in the definition, it says, type of requirement. So if you go about halfway down that page, your minimum front yard measured from the center of street or nearest lane of 211 in feet, it's got only 3 categories. Primary, Route 211, that's 200 feet setback. Secondary, 100, and private, 100. Well, you've got some roads, that's the whole point. It's a private road, but you've got roads, just like what I was talking about, and you've got a lot of them, like Thunder Valley Lane.
So what
It is not a private street, because, first of all, it's not on any plat, it's never been dedicated, but it's not in a subdivision, it's an old abandoned public road.
But if it's not platted, how are you gonna measure your 100 feet?
Because you can see where it is, I'm just saying it's not, there isn't any, it says here in the definition, street private, a street dedicated by deed of easement and or designated on a recorded survey. Well, that's what I'm telling you, it's not.
Yes, they are.
Mine is not.
Then it's not a private street.
Well, okay, then what is, that's my point. So under this definition and under this setback, that means where I live, where Frank Reynolds lives, and so forth and so on, all the way up that road, you don't have any setback. You can build right on it, and for exactly what Al's talking about, planning purposes, that's not a good result. So the whole name of the game was to broaden
So Michelle,
the definition of the private street to incorporate the kind of roads I'm talking about that once were a public road, but have either never taken in or...
Well, I'm with you if it's, when you were on to there's still a road there in some fashion. It's either used or maintained or something. I'm with you up to that point. I get where you are. Where I have trouble is...
I understand, you have trouble like at Five Forks, there used to be another road there that now I don't know where it exactly is.
so Michelle, when you get people come in for a building permit, and they're on, the building department, the zoning, tells people setbacks. If you're on one of these roads that we're talking about, that did get into the bird system, what setbacks do you tell people?
It just depends on what road it is, I mean. it's-
Well, if you're on a road that doesn't exist, like with Dave's Road, I come in for a permit on Dave's Road, that there's a road built, it's been used for 30, 40 years, the age of the houses, that private road, what are you gonna tell me are the setbacks?
Well, I'm gonna tell you what you're zoning, I'm gonna say, here's your setback sheet.
So you
I'll let you
automatically
figure it
say
out.
zoning, based upon the zoning, your setback from the center line of the road is X feet. You just look at the zoning, and you tell them the setbacks from the road, you don't care what kind of road it is, right?
That's for them to determine.
Huh?
That's for the applicant to determine.
No, it can't be for the applicant to determine, because we got to
Building
determine.
permit.
From the front,
Building.
from the road,
Well, it's a front setback, it's a front setback on the road.
Well, if your front might be.
Oh, Jesus Christ, don't go down that path.
Well, I mean, it's a path, but just like some of these roads.
No,
It's not the way the house fronts, it's the way.
I don't
the
wanna go down
property
that path, I'm just saying,
You gotta have a setback.
It says in there how to figure out what's the front, what's the side, and if it fronts on two streets, it's all in
But
there.
isn't what you're
But-
saying, that you show them the code, but it's the building permit that has to look at the setback, isn't it? Because that's where they're.
No, the zoning permit.
The zoning
The
permit.
zoning permit comes out of the zoning department, I believe, unless we're gonna change that too.
No, but
Probably haven't changed that. We ought to at least discuss it.
Still Texas.
See, so I feel the point is, for me at least, I hear what you're
The
saying.
point is there's a loophole now, so how about if we do this?
Well, it's not even just a loophole, let me just explain so that, before you change the language, because we have going up to property that my family owns, a road that was never dedicated by anybody, it's just a beaten path where trees have been cut down that my family uses because they have an easement to go up there to use it, it's not
An
been
easement that goes over somebody else's land?
correct.
Okay.
And in part. And so nobody, if we cease to use that on any regular basis, and the people whose land we're going over, or even us, if we want to build something on there, how would we know that road ever exists? I mean, how would you even know? What is that? It may have been used as a fire trail at some point, or it may not have been that exact dead, I'm not sure. But anyway, that's what I'm saying. A public road is not defined, a public street is defined, a public use is defined. But what is a public road?
Yeah,
So
if it's an easement, it's basically a road, you can't build it.
you can't build in an easement.
Right.
But for this purpose, this setback purpose, is that a public road? How would somebody know if you stop using it?
Well, yours is not a public road, the public's not there, you said it's a private easement.
But
and
how
you're
would,
right.
where's your definition for what a public road is?
I just read it.
No,
It's in
you
the
didn't, you read the definition of a public
Street and road,
road.
right? For the street
No,
and road
it
are the
never
same.
said
Street public, a platted street dedicated for the use of
And
the
use
general
right
public.
here, it doesn't say a public street. rather
But
than
street
public
and road are made equivalent elsewhere.
Where?
In the other
No,
definition.
they're not.
Yes, I
Public-
just read them all, yes, they are.
And David, you're missing it. Public street, it doesn't say public road.
I understand that, but road, comma, whatever. good
There's no
Lord.
definition for road that I see. Where's the
Road, comma, road, see quote, street.
It says C Street.
And- Private street, see street, comma, private, I read them all on the way out there, and everyone laughed. Public street, see street, comma, public.
So what are we trying to change here now exactly again?
We're just trying to change the part so that in one, the definition of private road or private street includes old abandoned roads that aren't in the state secondary system. Because this came up because there was an issue, I'll tell you where it was, at Deeks. Deek built a house right on the old road that goes from Rock Mills to Five Forks. And he didn't stay back 100 feet. And I said, he's in violation of the thing. And John McCarthy said the same, John McCarthy said, that's what I always do. Those kind of roads, I treat them as a private street. Then Peter Luke wrote a letter opinion and he said, the ordinance doesn't regulate that. It only regulates those kind of private streets. And if that's an old abandoned public road, the only other two definitions for setback purposes are, if it's not a private street, which Rock Mills to Five Forks Road is not a private street. It doesn't meet the current definition. And it's not a secondary road, because it's not in the system. And it's not a primary road, because it's obviously
Well, why
not
don't-
211.
Wouldn't it be simpler, just simply have a definition that a street is any access to a property? It seems that that is a very basic definition that covers public, private, recorded, unrecorded, non-maintained, or whatever. That any access to a property is a street, and that's going to be the primary access
But because the setbacks are differentiated between the type of street that it is. If it's a primary road, you gotta stay back 200 feet. If it's a secondary road, 100.
It should be 2 setbacks in the county. There should be one for a road like 211, and then everything else should be another setback. 211 should be maybe 1 setback, and then everything else with secondary road, private roads, non-recorded roads should be all the other.
Well, you gotta,
Why wouldn't that be reasonable?
Well, that doesn't really address the scenario that I'm sort of stuck on, which is the one that we're saying where it's not being used right now.
Well, but if you got a
So the
problem,
one next to me, you probably familiar with it. I wouldn't know where that is to do a setback, you know, the one going over toward the property, toward where the.
well, there's maps that showed that, right, Gary? I was thinking about, find a property behind you, and it showed right where it went, down along the edge of your property.
Well, on the tax map it does.
Well, that's, this,
But is that precise enough to know where to put a 100-foot setback?
if you're gonna get a building permit and that's your primary access, that's insurable, title insurance company, yeah. There has to be some evidence on the ground, but wherever your access to a property is, private or public, that determines your setbacks from that, access.
Most banks require a survey before you build a location.
I mean, you're not gonna, it's just a lot, you haven't played.
well, the other, I mean,
We haven't put, Dave, I got it now, buddy. We haven't put any common sense in here, in that, if somebody's gonna go out and buy a property, they're gonna
it says right in here.
need some
you can't read
verification.
that.
What?
And it says right in the beginning of the
What's that?
ordinance, no comment.
Okay. So,
Doubt it, I haven't looked for it.
somebody has to determine the access, is it a realtor list of property? Fuck it, I ain't trying anymore. Take it, Dave, it's all yours, man. Okay, I'm not trying to have any common sense here applied, so just do what.
How about
whatever
we just
you want.
change private
Do
and
whatever
other
you want.
roads in the chart?
It's just, we might as well get some Dumbo hats put on, play checkers with darts or something,
Yo-yo.
God, we're gonna be messing around with this stuff into 2022. Definition of N and V and all this crap. Not getting anything done, again and again and again. You got, 7 people here that's supposed to have some intelligence, and we can't move on and get this crap done? Holy moly.
Well, you've got a thing here that had a consensus, and now I don't know why we're revisiting it, because some people had a concern. So you got here what is here.
These are basically court-tested definitions, and
I don't know that this is a court-tested defdefinition, but I
If
mean,
it came from Fairfax, no doubt, it went to Fauquier. Fauquier, we use it when Fauquier had adopted it, so I'm pretty sure it's been court-tested. Everything's been court-tested in Fairfax.
So can you just tell me what it means? Just tell me, does it mean that road, it's not a platted road, we have an easement?
no, your road is not.
Mary Catherine, you're an attorney, you should know what it is.
And I'm
You're
telling
an
you,
attorney, you went to law school, you should have a real estate course that covers some basics.
I think I know what it is, Al, the problem is
No,
it's
you
not a
don't.
definition.
I don't know.
So that's what I'm saying, you got a problem.
I don't think it is, because if it's not in a deed, it's not dedicated, so it's not this definition.
But if it's a easement and it's dedicated, then
If it's just something that you have been using and it's not in a it says
No,
a
it is a
street.
dedicated easement, but we're the only ones who use it, it varies.
And then if you're gonna build something
If it's a
that is
dedicated
in the
easement, it's
deed, then
recorded.
they gotta stay back 100 feet from it.
Okay, guys,
Dedicated
You can
easement
look
is
and see.
recorded.
I get it.
So it's in the paper, it's in the courthouse, it's established where it is, period. A dedicated easement. Is that correct, Mr. Kohler, your understanding of real estate law? A dedicated easement means it's recorded? Yes or no?
Well, it's something that's in a deed.
Okay,
In a deed.
and it's recorded, a deed is recorded.
Deed,
Okay.
it's recorded.
Is that primary facial evidence?
Although it may not locate it on the deed.
Yeah, that's the
So I've seen
thing,
many
that's
deeds,
stated
to be fair, on many deeds, it just says with an easement to Route 211, period, as has been used in the past.
A 55-foot easement to the top of the mountain.
And Mr. Henry, with all due respect, for me, and I own a lot of that land along the road we're talking about, I need to know where it is all along that. It's not my access, but I would still be subject to the setbacks for wherever it was, right? So I don't know that you're,
Wherever it's determined your access is, or this road, then once it's determined, you're gonna have a 100-foot setback, period.
but it wouldn't be.
So why wouldn't it be? What do you want, nothing?
No, because I'm not using it.
It doesn't matter if you use it.
Well, that's why I don't know where it is.
If you go to build, that's when you determine your setback. If you're gonna build a house or something. That's what the purpose of setbacks is not setbacks for corn stalks or hay bales or cows to graze. It's for construction.
I understand, but we were talking about this illustrative example of the old road that goes back behind me. I wouldn't be accessing the property from that road. I'd be accessing it from my side.
But you could access it from that public road.
Well, I could, but the point is, even if I'm not using it, I have to go figure out wherever it is along there to know where the setback is.
If he wants to build a shed back there somewhere, he's got to figure out if this thing's even there.
If it's even there. So, it is what it is. I agree with you, there's a lot of shades of this, but I don't think we've addressed that issue.
We can't address every hypothetical issue that I don't know has ever come up in the county.
Could you just, I'm not quite sure I understand the reason for doing this. If the road,
Doing what? This what?
this provision, if the road is in use, then you can tell where it is. But if it's discontinued from
Well,
use.
that's what I propose to change what's here, a public road that is still in use.
That might work.
I'm okay with that.
It's not correct. I mean, so that means you go in for a building permit and you tell Michelle, there's no public road, there's nothing in use, I don't want a building permit. So she has to give you a building permit and there's no control over the setbacks on whatever your access is gonna be. So you build it right at the edge of this unknown access that you know where it is, but you're not gonna document where it is and you're gonna say there's no setbacks? That's crazy.
Well, that's right.
But
That's
that's
crazy.
part of the reason that in urban areas, just as David had said, they require the locality to accept the road before it becomes a road because, they don't want a bunch of this ambiguity all over the place. We apparently don't require that, you say, and I'm sure that's true, but, I don't know how I
Look, maybe another way to do this is just, instead of monkeying around with the definition, go to the chart in section 170-37, and where it says, that's what I'm saying, it's the issue, or the beginning of the issue, it's only got 3 categories: primary, secondary, and private.
Period. What's wrong with that?
I just told you what's wrong with it. Some of these roads, the former county attorney opined that a road like where I live, and like the road from Five Forks to Rock Mills that once was a part of the state system, it's been discontinued from state maintenance, but it's still a public road.
So you gotta have.
Is not a private street, because it's not private, it's still public. And that's the loophole.
But it's not one of those other 2 categories either.
Then it's obviously not a primary, and it's obviously not a secondary.
Okay,
So that's the issue. Exactly what you're saying, Al. There are roads that are in use that aren't private. They don't meet the definition of private, and they're obviously not secondary. I mean, Thunder Valley Lane is obviously not a primary or secondary highway. And I'm not really sure about what you're talking about at your place.
Well, it's just the old
Same thing.
Ford.
It's an old Ford, up there anymore.
Well, okay, so is it public, is it private? I don't know.
Simply say all other roads.
Well, that's just what I was gonna say. Instead of having private, just put all other.
Somebody has to figure out what that means.
What other means?
Well, it says minimum front yard measured from center of street or nearest lane of 211.
How about if we put other
And then you've got 3 categories: primary, secondary, and private. So how about we make it private to all and all other?
Or between other, and
Or just strike out private and put all other.
Put other twice, with
Well,
a comma between them.
I applaud your effort. I guess I wonder then what that would mean if track applied, but.
If what?
If you actually went back and now you're trying to figure out what other types of roads it could be, aren't you going back to the same definitions that you were looking at before and not finding one? In other words, there's no, what is the definition of road? Because now you're leaving.
It says
to that.
street.
Well,
See
what-
street.
Okay, what is the definition of street?
See, road.
Developed or platted.
Well, there's a whole bunch of them. Street, a strip of land intended for vehicular or pedestrian traffic and providing the principal means of access to property, including but not limited to road, lane, drive, avenue, highway, boulevard, and any other thoroughfare.
Okay, well,
So that would do it.
Sounds like it's helping out, and that does cover the basis. Maybe I'll get brains to find the garage or something.
So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna strike the whole thing out of the chart and just change private to any other street. You wanna put or road?
Any other access ways?
Or access. Well, access isn't defined.
Access.
Access sounds good.
Any other street or access.
The street is pretty much.
Street is defined.
It's already defined, it says boulevard or any other
So
thoroughfare.
let's just do any other street.
I mean,
Any other access, gotta be the word access.
But that's in the definition.
What,
It says,
access?
a strip of land intended for blah, 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 providing the principal means of access to the property. It's already in there. So let's strike out private and put all other streets.
let's argue that for a half hour.
No, we're done.
Whether we
So we're done. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, say no. The ayes have it. Great. Now, we're done with the May amendments, I think. Except for the bed and breakfast history. That's the one thing we have left. And the special standards for saying. Right, Michelle?
Correct.
See that? You weren't even here when I started asking that question.
So, we haven't gone through a lot of this stuff.
Really good.
Efficiency apartments and family apartments, we didn't get through that. Spa and health clubs.
Spas we did.
The spa includes massage parlor. Just wondering where you find it.
Sorry?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Does the spa include massage parlor?
I think it did, actually.
Pierce.
Anything for relaxation?
Yes. Therapeutic massage.
Therapeutic massage, relaxation.
Just checking.
Well, there's additional standards. Where is the additional
Yeah, the definition is further.
Yes, Bob. It says, any premises providing facilities devoted especially to health, beauty, and relaxation that deals with cosmetic, therapeutic massage, and/or holistic treatments, where people visit for professionally administered personal care treatments.
Very good.
See you later.
I can't wait.
All right?
I suppose there are state laws prohibiting certain things.
Well, it says somewhere in the special standards you have to have a license. And then look in the bottom of page, whatever page, it's 1, 2, the third page, additional standards for spas and health clubs. Such a use shall not be approved unless the applicant has a valid license under Title 18, Chapter 70 of the Virginia Administrative Code, as the same may be hereafter amended, if one is required, or, look at all this, a variance under 12 VAC 462-170 if applicable. 2, off-street parking. 3, must be located on state-maintained secondary or primary road.
What's the definition of that?
We just went over them. C street.
How to be consistent.
Issuance, shall be conditioned on getting a video, I know who wrote this. A VDOT entrance permit is required by Road Design Manual Appendix F, blah, 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 and other applicable state law or regulation, or otherwise complying with VDOT requirements. BZA may impose additional appropriate conditions, blah, blah, blah.
Okay. All right.
No lewd and was, oh, no. don't say
I
that.
didn't see that in there.
Well, we could add. All
I think
right,
that's probably under permitting.
so now we're ready to finally, yes?
I'm sorry, I'm just looking through these and the and I've got mine out of order, I don't know what page number it is, but there's one that says accessory uses and structures.
Yeah.
It looks like that's trying to be the definition of a guest house. But why does it just say accessory uses and structures? Do we need to, is that intended to be a definition of guest
Yeah,
house?
like, what's it?
Guest houses or rooms for guests and accessory structures.
Accessory uses and structures?
Yeah, that's what's in this column.
That's under what section it's, that
170-70.
changes.
So we're in,
I'm lost of what you're talking
Well, I'm just seeing, we've had this discussion around guest houses, and here it is used, but I don't recall that it's ever been defined.
about. Because the thing was about the guest house there was a problem because there was some overlap between a guest house and either a tourist home or a second dwelling on a lot.
I understand, but,
Because they were putting kitchens in,
yes, but,
or bathrooms, and you can have both.
well, I understand that, but it looks like we're using this term, but I don't.
You're talking the one that says guest houses or rooms for guests
Yes,
in an accessory structure? Yeah, okay.
That seems like we're either trying to define it here or we're using the term, but we still haven't defined it, unless we have it in
Well,
the.
a guest house is the difference is, it has nothing to do with the other stuff, the tourist home, because
No,
it's
I
for
know.
like, when you have,
I understand, I'm just saying, we're using the term here. I'm just trying to put this in context. Is this a definition, or is it defined elsewhere, or are we just regulating something that we haven't defined? The 170.
We're adding to the definition, that's the dark italic over here.
No, we're using the word guest house, we're not defining it.
well, look at 170-70.
That's what this is over here.
this is what we're saying, the apartment.
We're saying, we're adding to the definition, provided however, it's a guest house or room.
No, but there's a special thing on that, special standards,
I don't believe, I think I have looked for a definition of guest house before because we
Look
use
under
it.
house, comma, guest.
Maybe we do, I'm mixing this up.
Look under accessory use.
170-1.
170-70.
I'm getting 67, 70, accessory uses and structures. And under there's a list. Antennas, barns, carports, children playhouses, dog houses, fallout shelters, garages, private, gardening, guest house, number 9 is guest houses.
Okay, so that is where.
So that's where it's
Just
sort
add
of,
to the definition, but you don't want to believe me.
I do now.
good, I'm glad
I
you got
had a question on I can't find it right now, but when you talk about family apartments, no one may occupy it except a family member.
Well, I wanted to get rid of that, but I think I got outvoted.
Because it should be, you should be able to use it as a guest house if you want, I think.
It's
Well, no, because that can't have kitchen or bed. If it's a family, that's what the whole point is, that a guest house
Okay.
is like an extra bedroom over the garage that doesn't have housekeeping facilities.
So for at least 2 years at the moment, you can't use it for anything but for family. After that,
Personally, I just think that's absurd.
I think that's weird.
It's absurd because it's totally impossible to enforce.
Because it becomes a rental after 2 years.
How about we discuss, maybe, could we discuss a commonsensical approach to this that was
We did, right?
all resident, like it was combining the family, the efficiency apartment and the family?
That's what I propose to do.
When we talk about having help or someone who is helping you age or live or whatever the fuck.
Right, we did talk about that at the school again, but I can't remember if this reflects that or not.
I don't think it does, but,
I think it-
clearly we ended up with not completing that discussion on our.
Probably, I could do it if we require that at least it's only private road.
Well, I mean, those are in the additional standards.
Well, I can give a
And
bit of history.
the proposal was to change the square footage for efficiency apartments and increase that. Well, that's what it is here, and then, family apartments,
The family apartment was a purposeful language to circumvent the ordinance so that people that are already here, they can, expand the footprint on the property there for their children or grandchildren. Or really, a family apartment can be any direction, it can be kids, grandfathers, uncles, but a family division is only,
One generation.
well, no, it can be up and down, but it can't be sideways. So it can be parent to grandparent,
talking about the lot.
parent to child, grandchild. But you can't give it to a niece or nephew, but you can have them move into a building next to you to have to take care of it, because some people with extended family, you may have a niece or nephew, you may not have grandchildren.
Didn't we extend the time before they could sell it to? Wasn't it like?
Yeah, but again, it's almost impossible to enforce.
So right now we got,
Just one
we're
person.
gonna change the efficiency apartment to 800 square feet. Because it used to have this for 25% of the total area, and that could be some of these mega houses, that could be ginormous.
We've been agreeing on that one for a long time.
Okay, fine, so that's okay, and we're still gonna have the family apartments is where we left it, I thought.
Yeah,
I just don't know what we do with those when somebody gets older and moves out or, dies.
Theoretically, they ought to have to come in and get a permit for an efficiency apartment.
Okay.
But the thing is that the family apartment has a 1,200 square foot.
1,200, yeah.
So personally, I think we ought to pick a number, whether it's eight, I mean, I don't know where these numbers came from. I don't know where 600 or 800 or any of these numbers came from, or 1,200 for that matter. I think we ought to pick a number, get rid of the family apartment thing, because it's unenforceable to make sure that the family members really live in there. And for zoning purposes, what's the difference, really? In my opinion, they flush the toilet the same amount of times, they use water, they have a car, they make traffic, etc. Whether they're a family member or not is irrelevant for zoning, in my opinion. But I think we ought to just have one thing, efficiency apartment, and bump it, maybe to 1,200.
I may be able to.
Just get rid of guest house and everything.
No, guest house you could still have, but family apartments, get rid of that.
I think you need to leave it alone because it serves as an outlet within the county for some desperately needed housing. You know, I'm out in the county doing appraisals, and I come across properties where, you know, there's a school teacher or somebody living in renting a space that used to be a family apartment, and it's providing housing that can otherwise not be found, and I don't see why we need to. It's not out of control. There's really no complaints of abuse about it, and I think it's something that if you tighten that up, you're just going to create more issues.
I'm not really proposing to tighten it up, Al, I'm proposing to loosen it up.
You loosen it up?
Yeah, I'm gonna say, get rid of family apartments as a separate category and just say efficiency apartment. Use the bigger size that used to be in family apartment of 1,200, and then we don't have any worries. It could be a school teacher, it could be your mother-in-law, it could be anybody.
All right.
As long as forget about it.
Are there not other, I guess we could deal with this elsewhere, but is there not a distance from the main dwelling issue for these? I guess that's not.
That's in the family apartment, but not in the
So
efficiency
we can
apartment.
still deal with that as an additional standard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Keeping it close, you mean? To avoid just having.
So we're gonna change it to 1,200 square feet, period. And we're gonna get rid of family apartments altogether. As Mr. McCarthy said, amendment could create a long-term
And
enforcement.
where would we add the distance from the house? How are we gonna do that?
We're gonna take that out. Well, then we would automatically be taken out because it's only in the family apartment, which we're gonna eliminate.
Is the family apartment attached to the house or not?
No, but No, family apartment is not.
Efficiency apartment.
Yeah, they can do it.
Efficiency apartment could be anywhere on the property.
Yeah,
If I got 25 acres, I have a house in one corner and the efficiency apartment in the other.
right. As long as it doesn't violate the, I'm pretty sure, but I'm just gonna check right now.
They can be subject to health department.
Where is that?
And all that.
170-60 something.
Well, that's basically about everybody,
Sounds like everybody had another 12 square foot house.
65.
That's what we're gonna do, that's okay, but just so we're clear what we're
Let's
doing.
just check before we get too far.
I've always thought the family apartment was kind of weird, because family member's gonna grow up, or family member's gonna die, or something's gonna happen, and you're stuck with this house that you, what are you supposed to do with it?
Standards.
Right, so that's why it said 2 years, so that's why it was the way it
And
was.
then it just became a rent.
And then it just became around, but at least you couldn't just build it immediately to start building the rent. You had, you know, you restricted for something.
62, additional standards
Solve
for.
the housing crisis.
What?
Solves the housing crisis.
Efficiency apartments is the first one.
62?
62F. Category 1, residential uses, subsection
I'm sorry, where are you?
F. 170-62, subsection F. Efficiency apartments. Such use no more than 600.
Is in this,
We're gonna change that to 1,200.
not more than 2 persons shall occupy the apartment.
Fine. Off-street parking provided. Such use contained in the main dwelling or a permitted accessory building. Fine. Now, the family apartment had the 1,200, and all this stuff, if such living space is in a structure that includes other accessory space, then it must be served by a separate entrance, and all that stuff, that we're gonna get rid of all that stuff. Further, excluding renovation of existing structures, no supply required more than 200 feet from the main residence, except upon a written finding by the BZA, not an oral one, to be recorded in the permit that the exceptional topographic conditions exist, and so forth and so on. So,
But what you've got, if I can interrupt just a second, under additional standards for efficiency apartments that you want to now make one big category, it's no more than 2 persons shall occupy the apartment, whereas under family apartments, you have those such restrictions. That was why you had a difference in size, 600 square foot versus 1,200.
And you had the proximity, so what we're now contemplating would be everybody gets a 1,200 foot residence for 2 people anywhere on their property.
It doesn't make any sense.
I think it ought to be, we ought to keep the family apartment, but change the name of it, but use that definition.
Why don't we just go with something else?
Because that has more, it's a little more restricted, you can't be, so, you gotta be so much close to the house.
So just get rid
So
of
that people wouldn't be building,
Yeah, but
you have a house, and if they did rent it out, they would be very particular about who they put in it.
That's right.
Because it'd be magnificent.
Yeah, so in other words, David, instead of changing it, so keep the standards for family, get rid of the family requirement, but keep all the other stuff.
in other words, why don't we just strike out G and
Just strike out family apartment.
And use this whole, wait a minute, use this whole thing that's G1, that can just be F1.
That's right, that's what I was trying
Make
to say.
G1, what?
Yeah.
Good, well, see, I finally,
So instead of get rid of the
It's good that
family.
you catch up every once in a while.
well, come on, it's
I'll try to
getting
slow down for you.
You're still gonna get rid of the family requirement, whatever that was.
okay,
And just get rid of that name.
right. And then we get rid of 2, which is the apartment not be rented to anyone except a family member for 2 years. 23 months.
And then,
No more than 1 family apartment per separate parcel of land. I think we're gonna keep that.
You're gonna call it
Just change it efficiency.
efficiency, right,
So you can't start building them all over the place.
that's right.
Okay, great. So this whole business about the topographic thing, how about no family apartment shall utilize a separate entrance? Let's get rid of that.
I think we just gotta go over this carefully, make sure that it's, that we're not leaving something in 2 different ways, but yes, I think we're
All
going.
right,
the right way.
well, me and Michelle will work on that. Great, we got it. All right.
Good.
Now, I keep on saying this, I've been saying it up until now. I think we're up to the wireless. So, thank you, Gary, for the work that you did, and Holly too. Even though we haven't finished it yet. We're moving in the right direction. Aren't we? All right, wireless. Now, I want to thank Mary Catherine. She had some issues with this, and the one is in section 170-108.6 C2. And I honestly don't remember where this got tripped from, Albemarle, Fairfax, or Fauquier. But it says all applications shall also include a section detailing what consideration the applicant gave to other alternatives, including alternative sites, and why and how the specific site proposed in the application was selected. And she's brought up a good point, I guess, that we each ought to discuss. Does that conflict with whatever it says now in the state code that says something like you can't ask them for certain background stuff, and I mean, I'm not sure what that really adds to the whole process, so I'm okay with striking it.
Yeah, PEC brought this up during, one of the tower things.
Mm-hmm.
And but I do recall something about this, they've done some conflicting statute or something like that.
Well, yeah, they changed the statute. I think after, I mean, I honestly can't remember who that got, where that came from exactly, but
Why couldn't we say unless, at the beginning of that, all applications, couldn't you just say unless restricted by statute, all applications shall?
Well,
that's kind of like saying unless restricted by, lawyers like to say, unless restricted by statute, I know I can shoot you. So,
That's fine. I'm just trying to figure this out.
or like unless restricted by statute, you can go home and burn your house down and collect the insurance.
But you do anything you want.
So, is everybody okay with striking it? I'm really not sure. It'll be one less thing for them to have to look at.
I think it should be stricken.
All right, great. Now I'm going to turn it over to Mary Catherine. Of what other things? This is my time to say no try to authorship.
I wasn't sure we could force them to decommission, but maybe we can, I don't know.
Well, that, yes, we can.
We can force them into decommissioning, but the issue is the bonding, because they can go belly up and there's nothing you can do because they're not there to decommission unless they put a bond, so that's what it regulated.
We have to require, in order to require bonding for that, we have to require bonding for other similar.
Did we talk about that? We have it now for the solar.
We did agree we would do it for the solar, so I think we were
Right.
consistent on the bonding.
Yeah. Same.
Did you write that in yet? I don't know.
part of it. So part of it was, once I looked at this a little bit more closely, was, so you apparently took some language from another jurisdiction and replaced our bonding language. But I wonder whether we, so see.
Well, let's start with, where are you?
If you're going down, okay, it's,
All applications must include a decommissioning plan.
yeah, it's 108.
170, 108.6.
Thank you.
See?
New subsection 16.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Right here. I'm looking at that. Okay.
Yeah, so there's sort of a couple issues with it. One, so we don't, that anywhere I saw it, have a decommissioning, a requirement for a decommissioning plan, so that sounds reasonable to add. But we have, but you've got, that it's got to take it out after it ceases use for a period of 1 year or more, or otherwise it becomes obsolete. So we have a requirement in the ordinance, the ordinance, it says we require removal within 90 days after discontinuance of use, which is defined as no valid use for a period of 6 consecutive months. So this seems to be different from our existing.
Yeah, well, I didn't see that.
So I don't know what we want, but.
So do you want to change?
Yeah, well, or what we could just do is take out all applications must, and then also the other part was that, you added some different bonding stuff, but we already have a bunch of bonding stuff, which as long as we apply it in other places, we can still continue to use. So you could just take out the first sentence of your language, all applications must include a decommissioning plan, and move that up to our current bonding section if you wanted, and probably change.
Right, what is that, 108 point what? I noticed that too, that there was I mean, that's really where this should be.
Pull this out.
And I was gonna try to make that change, but I just didn't get around to it.
That's right, it's, look at, 108.5, E5.
Bonding. Right, so that's exactly where part of it should be.
Yeah, you could probably just decommission thing there.
Okay,
And there may be other parts you want to include, but anyway, that's where you're at, maybe.
so really, it's not so, it's all this stuff that's in 3, on page 3. The addition to C16 should really be not, well, it should be repeated or blended into 108.5.
108.5. Oh, but no,
108.5B fine.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. 108.5B fine. All right, Michelle and I'll take care of that and make sure it's all blended in. All right, next. Good catch, by the way.
Thank you. Then,
Oh,
under H, no, that's fine.
one thing in there, somewhere I saw Michelle, what she did, I guess, I'm not sure where it is, it was in a separate attachment, but it said the heights of most buildings, the S got somehow left out. And H on page 4, where it's bold, under 170, 108.8 H. And I don't know how that happened because, but whatever. There's an S in some of the buildings. Okay? It's fading down. All right, we're gonna finish up by 9 o'clock. What else have we got?
So your new section has,
K.
because we pulled it out of another area, it doesn't quite match, so that's.
Where, what new
Your
section?
new section K.
K, okay.
Um,
Page 5 of the August
More
31st.
complicated issues. So the term in our ordinance is personal wireless service facilities.
Yep.
But there's a couple of subcategories underneath that. So you've got category 1 facilities, which are, category 1 facilities are basically those that are placed entirely on existing structures. Category 2 facilities are entirely in structures that will disguise their appearance. Category 3 facilities are on or near structures that increase the height by no more than 20 feet. And then category 4 facilities are all others. So you kind of put all these requirements on all of these categories, and I'm not sure they all match. So that might need to be kind of pulled out.
So we gotta cross it with 108.2 definitions.
Yeah, and some of these, you don't want to follow this necessarily all. So I pointed that out in various places here, which we could go through, or we could go back to this. Yeah, I've got this here,
What?
do you have anything I said?
Well, just, I mean, tell me what, that's the problem I have. I mean, I got so many of these different copies and I'm not if other people do it. That's why I numbered the lines, so you could make a list and say, look at page 5, line 15 or 20 or whatever it is and say, so we're all on the same page, so to speak.
That's fine, I'll do that in the future, if that's easier, I apologize.
I mean, it's easier for me because then otherwise then there's another document and then all that stuff's out in the margin and sometimes it prints and if it's on your computer, it's great, but I'm not used to doing it that way.
All right, yeah, I'll be happy to do that, sorry about that. So you say applicant,
Say, oh, okay.
so you
Right
say,
in the beginning, a little line?
yeah, you say, applicants shall co-locate wireless communication facilities whenever feasible, provided that it has no or negligible adverse impact. So you obviously don't mean that for all those categories of facilities, because you only need that for the category 4 facilities probably. So that needs to be kind of pulled
It seems
apart.
in general, we didn't draft this section with these different categories in mind, so.
No, I really have to say, I didn't. I just took out what we put into the comp plan and laid it out.
Yeah, and this unfortunately doesn't quite match with the ordinance and doesn't quite match with the state code, so it might be to be done a little bit more, but,
Oh, while we're here, I'm sorry, I didn't bring it in with me, but the Margaret, coworker, I got that in the truck, they've got some recommendations that they want us to, take a look at, so since we've already forwarded the comp plan, Margaret's on, we've already forwarded the comp plan, we may want to look at, the same thing for the language that they're contemplating that we consider.
Who is Margaret on?
The broadband committee,
Oh, do they still have it?
yeah, they had a meeting
They
tonight.
met tonight, I just came from there.
so they want us to look at the
They
language.
send you these?
Yeah, they,
What?
I'm sorry, I got that out.
Actually, from my comic books.
So they have additional language to,
I can go get it real quick, I'm parked out front.
I don't know what you guys want to do, but.
We talked
Well,
about
it's 10:09,
the
so.
plan or the ordinance?
What?
To go in the ordinance, 'cause or we may have to also, consider something for the comp plan.
I saw those letters, I mean, we took what we had from what they gave us
Yeah, I've
before.
tried to iron some of their concerns out, but, because the board of supervisors can waive any requirement in the zoning ordinance, but if the comp plan is specifically stated that something shouldn't look like something, then we'd have to ignore that too in an application. So I think that's what the concern that they have, is that maybe we ought to look at the language that we're proposing.
Why didn't they send that to
They
me?
just did it
to the
tonight.
commission? What?
Well,
They just did
I
it.
just happened to be there tonight, and she handed out a package that had the agenda on
How
it.
did you get there tonight? You've been here.
It started at 6.
Oh,
And,
never thought of that.
but the proposal that Piedmont Broadband made two weeks ago, whatever it was, that we may have to look at the zoning.
Well,
there, too.
what's the pleasure of the commissioners? I think we ought to move forward with a hearing on these other May amendments. You want to leave this and leave this part and the solar part out?
Well, I think we
And
can.
do that separately?
We've got to wait for the comp plan to see if everybody is happy with the comp plan before we start writing language that fits it.
Well, that'll obviously simplify our discussion of it, and it'll give us some time to clean this all up and merge that in. I saw you, Gary, you were nodding, but I couldn't tell, because you're having that mask on, I can't tell whether that is good or
I
bad.
can't tell when I'm sticking my tongue out. If you
No, I would see that. Have you been doing that?
I could just guess. I can't think of any reason why I'm not. I mean, I think we should get to the line, we're gonna have to do a markup, right? I mean, are we gonna just go
Of
out?
the wireless part?
No, of the others, are we gonna put that in the line edits and we have to have that, are we gonna just go straight to hearing with that, is that what you're proposing?
I'm proposing, I guess, I don't know, I'm not, I would like to get it done, but
Yeah, but I mean, I think-
maybe we ought to, I mean, at our upcoming October meeting, I want to get this, we'll do that family stuff, we'll get with Michelle, and I want to have an ad ready to go to bring the so-called May amendments, maybe we'll rename them to the November amendments, and have it at a public hearing
You've
In
also-
November.
You've also got that adaptive reuse, we got that worked out like we wanted it, but it just disappeared too.
No, Michelle's got that somewhere, and we're gonna add that back in.
So,
Whatever you did come up with, there was some language that right.
but I understand that you're going to, at what point do we see the actual markup?
Next.
At our upcoming meeting?
Yes.
Okay, that's what, see,
I'll scan this and I'll have a 5-year-old scan it.
So is that what-
I'll send it to y'all to go.
All right, but my question is, we're gonna leave the telecom part and the solar part out till the comp plan is acted on by the supervisor?
I mean, I would, yeah, I mean, I'd be okay, I think we need to reconcile it with the code structure and some of the disconnects that are there now. I mean, if that could be done, I'd be fine with looking at it, but I think there is the advantage of waiting because, okay, then what's gonna happen?
All right, well, good, then we don't have to do it tonight.
So I have one question about it.
Go ahead.
You know, on page 5, line 40. Well, first of all, we have the number in there, for some reason, 102 now.
10, wait a minute, page 5, line 40?
It's some sort of typo there or something.
Yeah, there is, because mine only has 39 lines on it.
We're looking at September 12th too, I think.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh,
there we are, looking at September 12th. Sorry about that.
All right, wait a minute.
Maybe it's changed.
No, that's a later one, I had August 31st or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's nothing, but that's just.
Oh, that's, I think, a page number.
Yeah, it might be. And then it says that that if we're gonna use like silos, they have to be the same as working silos in the county. I'm just not sure that they're really
Already
tall
working.
enough to be reasonable, and, it's not really feasible. Most likely, I think the shortest silo of these ones we have now is 65 feet, but, or something like that.
So what do you think of August?
Well, I just don't want to be in a position of, practically denying, cell towers completely. But at some point, we're probably going to want to try to work some kind of cell service out around here, and we don't want to like box ourselves too far into a corner.
So what are you proposing to do, just take that?
Well,
part out?
I don't think we should say it has to be consistent with a working silo. I mean, we've got 3 that are taller than those, and I think most people are amazed when I take them around the county, they go, wow, that's a cell tower? That is so cool, And, because it's invisible, because it looks like a farm thing, Even if it's big, it looks like a farm. And I don't agree with you on that, but I think it's true, I'm not saying.
So where do you want it says silo towers would be appropriate where many rural landscapes are divided. When you strike that whole last part?
I don't know, I just think we need to think it out a little bit, I'm just worried that we're denying cell towers completely at some point here if we're not careful, and then we're gonna run into those troubles.
So the solution would be to drop that.
Zoning administrator,
All right.
One of those ones that,
Well,
we had down there in Butler's.
wanna call it a night?
Sure.
All right, so, everybody got it, at the next meeting, we're gonna have the markup thing, we're gonna have the ad drafted, and we're gonna go over the bed and breakfast stuff. I'm gonna send the definitions around that Gary and Holly worked up.
Yeah, they're different, by the way. Mine are not, Holly did something distinct, so you might want to look at those. We didn't discuss Holly's stuff tonight.
Is this a bed and breakfast as a tourist home?
Yeah.
definition?
And figure out what to do with that. So that's gonna be the main focus next time. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
We didn't get public comment.
Oh, public comment, right. Anybody from the public wish to say anything?
Please know that
Everyone's shaking their head no, and you already got your shot. So thank you all for coming, members of the public and commissioners, thank you for your input. And we're not gonna have, our next meeting is our regular meeting, right? October, whatever. All right.
thank you all.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.